Good morning, Year 6, and welcome to another reading lesson. Before we begin our reading lesson, I'd like you to pause the video here and have a go at the do now. You are to complete all 8 sentences. As you can see, the keywords have been highlighted in red for you, as these are the key vocabulary words we've learned this week. So I'd like you to pause the video here and have a go at completing the sentences. Well done if you've completed all 8 sentences. We are not going to mark them together because I know everyone will have different sentences, which is great. You can send them in on Seesaws for your teachers to have a look. So let's begin with our reading. We are going to do a paired reading activity today, which means I'm going to take the ownership of the reading, but you also are going to join in with me. This will be a great way for us to read together. It's just a little bit boring if you're hearing my voice constantly, so it'd be lovely to hear you all read with me. So what I'm going to do is share my screen so you can see the text on my computer. So I'm going to start reading first, and then when I ask you to pause the video and continue reading, you are going to take the ownership. Death comes to dinner. On Eventide night, even the streets of dull, conservative Jackalfax came alive. The cobbled stretch of Empire Road had swelled from a merry hum of good spirits in the morning to raucous, uncontainable revelry in the final hours before midnight. We know that here, before the final hours of midnight, there was like a party atmosphere. Street bands played for coins on every corner, competing for the attentions of passers-by. Coloured lanterns jostled with streamers and strings of tiny lights, and the air smelled of beer, burnt sugar and meat grilling on the spit, here again suggesting to me that the atmosphere is quite busy. The blackened sky-face clock loomed above the celebrations. At midnight it would fade to the colour of morning tide, a pale, promising pink, and spring of one would bring a fresh beginning for everyone. The night was uncommon and crowded with possibility. Now, I would like you to read for everyone right till the end of occasion. So you're going to pause the video here and read up until there. Fantastic, Year 6. I love the expression and fluency in your voices. Now I'm going to continue. The room was quiet, but for the soft scratching of silverware against china, this suggesting that the cutlery, for example, the knives and forks, were making quite a scratching noise against the plates. Morrigan was conscious of every mouthful she swallowed, every cool sip of water. She heard each tick of the clock on the wall like a drumbeat in a marching band, marching her ever closer to the moment when she would cease to exist suggesting when she would die. She hoped it would be painless. She'd read somewhere that when a cursed child died, it was usually quick and peaceful, just like falling asleep. She wondered what would happen afterwards. Would she really go to the better place, like Cook had once told her? Was the divine thing real? And would it accept her with open arms, as she'd been promised? Morrigan had to hope so. The alternative simply didn't bear thinking about. After hearing Cook's tales of the wicked thing that dwelled in the worst place, she'd slept with the light on for a week. This probably suggested that she was quite scared after hearing Cook's tales. It was a strange thing, she thought, to be celebrating the night of your own death. Strange, another synonym for strange, is quite weird. It was really weird to celebrate the night of your own death. It didn't feel like a birthday. It didn't feel like a celebration at all. It was more like having your funeral before you die. Just as she was wondering if anyone would say a few words about her, Corvus cleared his throat. Morrigan, Ivy and Grandma looked at him, their hands pausing halfway to their mouths with their forks full of lamb and peas. I just wanted to say, he began and then seemed to lose momentum. I just wanted to say, lose momentum means his speech was almost stopping. He was stuttering because he was quite nervous. Ivy's eyes misted over and she squeezed his hand encouragingly. Go on, dear. Ivy's eyes misted over, maybe suggesting that she had tears in her eyes, maybe. Let's continue reading. He tried again and cleared his throat loudly. I just wanted to say that the lamb is very good. Cooked to perfection, nice and pink. There were murmurs of agreement around the table, and then a clinking of cutlery as everyone carried on eating. Murmurs suggesting people were kind of talking under their voice, muttering under their voice, agreeing that the food tasted good. That was probably as good as it was going to get, Morrigan realised, and she couldn't say she disagreed about the lamb. Now, I would like you to continue from, well, if nobody minds, right till the end of Humble Serenity. So you're going to pause the video and continue reading here. Really thinking about your intonation. If there is dialogue, picking that up whilst you read as well. Fantastic, Year 6. I'm now going to continue. Corvus wasn't sure if I should say anything, but I know Morrigan wouldn't mind. Go on, Morrigan said. It's fine, really, go ahead. Ivy beamed at her for the first time ever. Beamed at her, suggesting Ivy looked over at her. And emboldened. Emboldened, we know what emboldened means, as it's one of our key vocabulary words. Emboldened means to have the courage, instilled with courage to stand up from her seat in this context. and emboldened stood up from her seat. Corvus and I are having a baby. Fell silent. Then a great smash came from the doorway as the maid dropped a platter. Corvus tried to smile at his young wife, but it came out as a grimace suggesting that he had the look of disapproval or anger on his face. Well, Ivy prompted them, aren't you going to congratulate us? Ivy, dear, grandmother said, smiling icily suggesting that she's smiling quite angrily toward her, icily at her daughter-in-law. Perhaps your announcement might have been better received at a less sensitive time, for instance, the day after my only grandchild is due to leave us tragically at the age of 11. Now, I would like you to continue reading, and you're going to read from Strangely right till the end of the page. So remember to think about your intonation whilst you read, the dialogue of different characters, and the expression in your voices. Fantastic, Year 6. You all sounded great. Now I'm going to continue. Morrigan tried not to laugh at the grim expression on her father's face. Yes, delightful, he said, unconvincingly. Unconvincingly means failing to make someone believe that something is true or valid, so it's suggesting here that he's trying to steer the attention away from Ivy's pregnancy. But perhaps we'll celebrate later. But Morrigan doesn't mind, do you, Morrigan? Mind what? Morrigan asked. That I'm going to be bolted out of existence in a few hours and you're planning a wardrobe for my replacement? Bolted out of existence is just another way of saying that I'm going to die. Not in the slightest. She shoved a forkful of parsnips into her mouth. Oh, for goodness sake, grandmother hissed, glaring down the table at her son. We weren't going to bring up the D word. It wasn't me, Corvus protested. I didn't say dead, grandmother, said Morrigan. I said bolted out of existence. Well, just stop it. You're giving your father a headache. Ivy snuffed. That's much worse. Enough. Doesn't anybody care that I'm with child? With child is just an old-fashioned way of just saying that I'm pregnant, shouted Ivy, stamping her foot. Doesn't anybody care that I'm about to die? Morrigan shouted in return. Can we please talk about me for a minute? I told you not to say the D word, boomed grandmother. There were 3 loud knocks on the front door. Silence fell. Well done for getting through the text with me. What we're going to do now is answer questions together. So I'm going to just share my screen with you and you should be able to see my PowerPoint with my questions that I'm going to answer first. Page 1. These are my questions to model to you, so please do not write these questions down. I'm going to show you these under the visualizer. So my first question is, a merry hum of good spirits in the morning to raucous, uncontainable revelry in the final hours before midnight. What does the phrase in bold mean? Well, the phrase in bold is uncontainable revelry in the final hours before midnight. So I need to work out what that means. And then number 2, explain using evidence how the readers know the atmosphere in Jackalfax was busy during the final hours before midnight. And it's 2 marks, which means I need to give 2 pieces of evidence and explain each piece of evidence. So I'm going to now share my visualizer so you can all see me go through these questions. Okay, so a presentation should look exactly like this with today's date, Tuesday the 9th of February. Reading, because that's the subject we're doing. Your do now completed with your 8 sentences, and now on to questions. This section here is for just me to do, so please do not do these 2 questions as they're for me to model to you. Okay, so let's go in and start. The first question I had was, a merry hum of good spirits in the morning to raucous, uncontainable revelry in the final hours before midnight. What does the phrase in bold mean? The phrase in bold is uncontainable. It's uncontainable revelry in the final hours before midnight. I've labelled here that it shows a party atmosphere. The phrase in bold suggests, well, I know it's uncontainable revelry, so here it suggests here it was difficult to control the lively and noisy festivities. So again, raucous, we know that it means quite unpleasant, loud noises. So I'm going to go in with, for number 1, I've written question number 1, and I'm going to go with, it was difficult to control the lively and noisy festivities. And then I'm going to mention in the final hours before midnight, because that is the time when it was happening. So I'm going to say it was difficult to control the lively and noisy festivities in the final hours before midnight. In the final hours before midnight. So I'm just going to read that back and see if it answers the question. So the phrase in bold is uncontainable revelry in the final hours before midnight, and I have written it was difficult to control the lively and noisy festivities in the final hours before midnight. Fantastic. Okay, my next question for number 2 is explain using evidence how the readers know the atmosphere in Jackalfax was busy during the final hours before midnight. This is a 2-mark question and it's asking me to explain using evidence. So I need to look at the atmosphere, which is the surroundings, the area in Jackalfax was busy during the final hours before midnight. Well, already I have one piece of evidence here that I can use, which is uncontainable revelry in the final hours before midnight. That's something that I would use here, suggesting quite a loud party atmosphere. The second piece of evidence that I would use, and I need you to underline it with a ruler. So the second piece of evidence that I'm going to use is street bands played for coins on every corner. This suggesting to me the streets were really busy. Again, I could even put in competing for the attention of passerby. If it's suggesting that street bands are playing for coins on every corner, it suggests that the streets are really busy. On every corner of the street, there's a street band trying to compete for money from the attention of passersby. So I'm going to write those 2 pieces of evidence first. So I'm going to say, write down number 2, because I'm on question number 2. And I'm going to write down the atmosphere in Jackalfax was loud and busy. Full stop. The evidence states, and I'm going to put in my piece of evidence here, which is uncontainable revelry in the final hours before midnight. So that's my first piece of evidence here, and then I'm going to go with additionally the streets were busy with people. And I'm going to put my evidence in here, and that is street bands played for coins on every corner. So street bands played for coins on every corner. Full stop. And ending off my quotation mark because I've used the quotation here. So I'm just going to read that back. The atmosphere in Jackalfax was loud and busy. The evidence states uncontainable revelry in the final hours before midnight. Additionally, the streets were busy with people. Street bands played for coins on every corner. Fantastic. I think I've got both my marks here as I've put in 2 pieces of evidence and I've explained them both. I've said that it's loud and I've used a piece of evidence to suggest where it's loud, and then I've said it's busy. Street bands played for coins on every corner. So now we're going to move on to you answering the questions. So the rest of the questions are for you to answer. So please make sure you are setting your work out just like I have here with do now completed and now going on to your questions. Okay, so let's go to my PowerPoint. Okay, so from this moment onwards, this is your opportunity to show your great answers. You are continuing with the questions from this moment. So in your books, you must have written down the date, reading, do now completed, and now you're going to write down question 1. And your first question is, Corvus hated parsnips and would never usually allow them to be served when he was home for dinner, but he waited with grim silence as the maid spooned a huge mountain of them onto his plate. Choose the best words to match the description above. Circle both of your choices. So we know both of the choices means that there's going to be 2 choices here. So you just need to write down your choices. And number 2, she heard each tick of the clock on the wall like a drumbeat in a marching band, marching her ever closer to the moment when she would cease to exist. What does the phrase in bold mean? Okay, so you're going to have got these 2 questions. So pause the video here and come back once you have finished. Please only continue with the video if you have finished. Do not continue if you haven't finished both questions, as you are showing yourself that integrity to mark your work honestly. So let's have a look at question number 1. Choose the best words to match the description above. Circle both of your choices. So we need to match the description above of Corvus hated parsnips and would never usually allow them to be served when he was home for dinner, but he kept a grim silence as a maid spooned a huge mountain of them onto his plate. And we need to pick two words that match this description. So the two words you would pick here is reluctantly, because he would never usually allow them to be served, suggesting that he's feeling quite reluctant. He doesn't really want it, but he's having it just to be quite kind. So reluctantly, and then a big portion is the second word that you need to write down, because huge mountain of them on his plate suggests that he's having a big portion. We know it's not greedily, we know it's not only a few parsnips, carrots instead, happily, or he was given, or Corvus ate the parsnips, because he wasn't given any carrots, he wasn't given a few parsnips, he wasn't being greedy, he didn't ask for a lot of them, he wasn't happy about what he received, and lastly, he was feeling quite reluctant to eat them, so it didn't suggest here that he's eating them already. Okay, so number two, what does the phrase in bold mean? The phrase in bold is she was ceased to exist. Cease means to come or to bring some life to an end. Anything, it doesn't have to be just human. So in this context, it's that her life is coming to an end. That is what cease to exist means. Well done if you got those correct. Please make sure you mark through your work. If you haven't got those correct, just write in the correction next to your answer. Now, number three, you have, it was a strange thing, she thought, to be celebrating the night of your own death. Circle the word that is closest in meaning to the word in bold. So the word in bold is strange. So pause the video here and have a go at number three. Okay, so let's look at the options we have here. We have annoying, we have familiar, we have ordinary, and we have weird. Strange means something that's quite weird. You know, it's nothing, it's unordinary. It doesn't usually happen. So I know definitely the word that would go here is weird, because it's a synonym for strange. The word ordinary, familiar, they're both antonyms, which means they're the opposite of strange, so it wouldn't work in this context. And annoying, it doesn't fit in this context. So if we replace strange with weird, we can see if our sentence makes sense. So let's have a look. It was a strange thing, she thought, to be celebrating the night of your own death. And I definitely think that does make sense. Okay, well done if you got that one correct. You're just writing in your answer. You do not need to print anything out or write out the whole sentence, just like I modelled earlier. Number four. Well, if nobody minds, said Ivy, dabbing her mouth prettily with her linen napkin. What does the phrase in bold suggest? The phrase in bold is dabbing her mouth prettily with her linen napkin. So you're going to pause the video here and write down what you think this phrase suggests. Okay. Well, dabbing is a verb, and it means to kind of tap or press against your face quite lightly. So in this phrase in bold suggests that Ivy is touching around her face quite lightly, or you could say she's patting around her mouth lightly, cleaning off any food. If you have the words kind of touching, patting quite lightly, that would be acceptable in this context. If you have written down something and you're unsure because I haven't mentioned it, that's absolutely fine. Please do not mark it as incorrect, because it might be that it is correct, but I just haven't mentioned it. So again, remember what I've just said, dabbing, kind of pressing lightly against her skin, tapping. It's almost suggesting that she's showing quite respectful etiquette at the dinner table, you know, with her linen napkin. That's a type of material. Okay, we're going to go on to question number 5 now. Question number 5 and 6. So, number 5, Ivy was relentless. You'll have a new grandchild, or Nella. Corvus will have a new daughter, or a son. Wouldn't that be lovely? You need to circle the word that is closest in meaning to the word in bold. So you're just writing down number 5 and the word that is closest in meaning to the word in bold. The word in bold is relentless. And then number 6, strangely her words made Morrigan perk up a little. It was perhaps the most sentimental thing she'd ever heard grandmother say. What does the phrase in bold mean? And the phrase in bold is perk up a little. So you're going to have about these 2 questions. Pause the video here, please. Okay, so let's have a look at the options we have here. Well, I said earlier in the video, relentless means when you are continuing or being quite firm about something. It almost suggests you're being quite persistent. So in this context, the closest meaning is persistent, because Ivy is being quite persistent about her upcoming child, her pregnancy. She's saying, you know, you have a new grandchild. She's almost giving the reasons why this pregnancy is going to be great. You wouldn't have crazy, heartless, or annoying in this context, because This is Ivy talking about herself here. She's, just continuing firmly about herself. So persistent is the word that you need to copy in there. So write that down for number 5 if you haven't got that correct. And number 6, the phrase in bold is perk up a little. Well, perk is it means to become quite lively or cheerful because of something. So in this context, Morrigan her words made Morrigan perk up a little, which meant it made her feel quite cheerful because Grandma was being quite positive towards her, and usually her grandmother isn't really nice to her. So in this context, she's quite happy that her grandmother has said something quite nice. So again, in this context, you would write down something along the lines of to become quite lively, or Ivy was feeling quite cheerful because grandmother had been quite positive. So pause the video here if you haven't got those correct and just write down your corrections. Well done, Year 6. You are doing fantastic. Now let's go on to number 7. Number 7, what does the phrase bolted out of existence mean? Well, we can use the text to help us understand that, because I know it actually tells you within the text. So have a look where bolted out of existence in the text is, and it is here. I said bolted out of existence. I didn't say dead, grandmother. I said bolted out of existence. So I've just given you a little clue there. So I'd like you to pause the video and have a go at number 7. Okay, so now we're going to give you the answer for number 7. So number 7, the phrase bolted out of existence refers to death. It means there's an upcoming death, she's going to die. So if you've written down death or Ivy, that Morrigan's going to die, that is an acceptable mark. Something along the lines of death is definitely what you're going to get the mark for. So well done, Year 6. We're now going to go on to our final set of questions. So these questions here require you to have this YouTube video open with this video, and then another tab with your reading text. It is really important you use the text here, because you won't be able to answer the questions if you don't have the text. As you can see, I've put the marks for some of the questions. So more of the 1 mark question, you're just looking for one thing in the text, so one piece of evidence or just a statement in the text, whereas for 2 marks you need to give 2 pieces of evidence from the text. So I'd like you to pause the video here. Please make sure you have the questions and the text available for you to answer all questions. Okay, so pause the video here and have a go at these questions. So I'm now going to show you the answers. Please do not continue with the video if you haven't finished. Please show that integrity to mark your work honestly. So I'm now going to reveal the answers to you, and you must mark along with me. So number 1, what does Ivy announce at the dinner table? Ivy announces that she is pregnant, so that is the announcement she makes. Number 9, what kind of death did Morrigan want? Well, Morrigan wanted a painless death, and it states that in the text because it says she wanted a painless death. Number 10, how does the atmosphere in the streets of Jackalfax contrast with the atmosphere in Morrigan's house? And it's a 2-mark question, which means you need to give a comparison between 2 different things. So the first one, the atmosphere in the streets of Jackalfax was described as loud and lively with noisy festivities going on. So that's 1 mark for describing the atmosphere. Whereas Morrigan's house had a sombre, and I put in brackets, dull atmosphere, as her family were preparing for her death. So 2 marks there, 1 for describing the streets of Jackalfax and then comparing it with the atmosphere in Morrigan's house. So 2 marks there, so you must have both those points making the comparison. Number 11, how can you tell Corvus wasn't fully supportive of Ivy announcing her news at the dinner table? It's because Corvus grimaced at Ivy, which shows he was showing her a look of disapproval towards her announcing her pregnancy. So he was quite annoyed, quite angry at the fact that she had just announced her pregnancy. Also, if you've written at the fact that he said we can celebrate at a later time, that's also you could also get a mark for that, because again it's showing that he's steering away from Ivy's announcement. Number 12, when Ivy announced her news, Morrigan felt an unexpected warmth towards the savage old bird of prey. What does this suggest about their relationship up to this point? So Morrigan and her grandmother don't have a great relationship, as she didn't expect her grandmother to be upset about her upcoming death. So that's what it suggests, that the words unexpected warmth, she didn't really expect her grandmother to say those kind words at the dinner table. So again, if you've written something along the lines of they actually don't have a great relationship, but maybe because her death is upcoming, grandmother is trying to be quite kind and nice towards Morrigan. And then finally, for number 13, which is a 2-mark question, you need 2 pieces of evidence, because it says explain using evidence how you know Morrigan's father. How explain using evidence how you know, Morrigan's father wasn't happy at the timing of the announcement. So I've written, the evidence from the text suggests Morrigan's father had a grim expression on his face. This suggests he was annoyed that Ivy had announced her pregnancy. So that's my one piece of evidence, and I've explained it, saying that Morrigan's father was annoyed that Ivy had just announced her pregnancy. Additionally, this is where my second piece of evidence comes in here. Additionally, he said, perhaps we'll celebrate later, suggesting he didn't want to talk about the subject and wanted to steer attention away from Ivy's pregnancy. So again, something along the lines of he was being quite negative. He wasn't really happy that, Ivy had just announced that she's pregnant. He didn't want to talk about it. So if you've mentioned something along the lines of that and given those two pieces of evidence, I think these are the only two pieces of evidence in the text that you would actually have to write down. But if you have found something different, I'd be interested to see that. So please make sure you're marking your work through. If you're a little bit unsure with an answer for a question, just leave it blank and we can mark that with you on Seesaw. So year 6, the page I'd like you to read today is page 2. So you're going to read page 2, showing your expression, the fluency within your voice, and send that in on Seesaw. You can just voice record or actually record yourself reading. That would be great, so we can see your faces as well, and I cannot wait to see them on Seesaw. So well done for getting through the reading lesson. Tomorrow is our final reading lesson, as Thursday is RE day, so I can't wait to do that lesson with you all. So take care, and I'll see you all tomorrow.